Hi, and welcome to Is That Even Constitutional? This is a podcast where we look at the Constitution through the lens of current events. My name is Sadhana Devaraja, and I'm not a constitutional scholar, but my friend Ken Thomas is. Hi, Ken. How are you doing?
Morning, Sadhana. How are you?
I am good. And so this is going to be our second fast take. On Friday, the Supreme Court ruled in Casa v. Trump. This is the case that is about birthright citizenship. And so we wanted to get on the line and just chat a little bit about what that decision means. I've been getting some questions about it. And so wanted to clear up to the extent that we can what happened there. So, birthright citizenship, I think people were following this because, in the US, there are two ways that folks can get citizenship. It's either that you get it through lineage, like your parents were US citizens, and that's how you got your citizenship, or by being born on US soil, right? And so that second part was established by the 14th Amendment. It was really a way to settle that folks who were enslaved here are actually citizens. They were born on U.S. soil. And so that's kind of the origins, as I understand it, of birthright citizenship. And this case was about that, but also about other things. So, Ken, wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what this case was about.
Sure, Sadhana. So, as you were pointing out, the underlying merits of this case is about birthright citizenship, which is, of course, an incredibly important case because there are many people whose citizenship is based on being born in the United States because, for instance, neither of their parents were U.S. citizens, which is another way for you to obtain citizenship. And so the merits of this case will, in fact, affect a number of people. What was actually at issue in this case was whether or not the underlying merits were going to be allowed to go into effect. In other words, was the administration, who had essentially declared by executive order that birthright citizenship was not going to apply in certain situations, was the administration going to be allowed to move forward with their plans? So what did this mean? Well, this meant that the administration, if there were certain individuals who had been born in the United States, but their parents were either undocumented or there's some combination of undocumented or here in some kind of temporary visa status, then they might not issue passports to the persons born here, or they may not provide federal benefits, or they might otherwise treat them as if they were not individuals who had citizenship by virtue of being born here. And this could go to an extreme level where individuals could actually be, and this could be infants, could be born stateless, meaning that they didn't have U.S. citizenship, and depending on the state of origin of their parents, they might not actually even have the right to be a citizenship of another state. And so, in theory, now this is possibly not something that's contemplated, but in theory, you could have infants being deported and with no place willing to grant them citizenship. So the extreme application of this would be obviously, have serious harm being threatened to those individuals. Now, that is the underlying merits case. And what had happened was that the lower courts had all considered this case, had not seen any real constitutional way for this interpretation of birthright citizenship to be effectuated. So they had basically struck down or they had enjoined the executive branch's ability to enforce this order. And then they had enjoined it not only for the people in front of the court, but they had enjoined it for the entire nation so that the executive branch couldn't enforce this for anybody throughout the country.
Okay. And so what ended up being ruled on? Did the Supreme Court talk about the merits case? Did they not? Could you tell us kind of what happened?
Well, so the court didn't rule on the merits, but they essentially found that the courts we're not going to be able to issue what are referred to as universal injunctions. Now, injunctions are the court orders that direct individuals or agencies or other entities to either do or not do something. And the court held that the only ability for the lower courts to enjoin somebody is going to be the individuals who are before the court. And so that means that although the plaintiffs might win the case or might have got a substantive ruling on the merits, so essentially the district court might say, okay, you're right, birthright citizenship doesn't apply, we're going to allow you to continue to get federal benefits, that this means that any other plaintiff who is in the same position, other individual in the same position, is going to have to individually come into court and make their case in order for them to receive the same benefits. So the obvious answer here is that despite the fact that there may be a path to winning these cases, is that the burden on individuals is going to be particularly difficult in cases where it's individuals who have to bring these cases. And in this particular birthright citizenship, this is situations where it's often going to be individuals who are most harmed and individuals who would have to bring these cases. So although the Supreme Court didn't reach the merits, for practical purposes, there are going to be many people who could, in fact, lose federal benefits and would have to actually get a lawyer and go to court before they would be able to receive federal benefits or get the kind of relief that they were looking for.
So, yeah, so it sounds like, if I'm capturing it right, the constitutionality of birthright citizenship was never ruled on in this case, but really what was ruled on how courts can enforce or keep the administration from kind of applying this. And so what ends up happening is that individuals will have to go to court case by case to be able to say that, I should be a citizen because birthright citizenship allows me to be one. And of course, we know what's happening. I'm in LA, across the country, with folks who do not have citizenship being targeted, even if they have other legal status. And so what we're asking is for these families to go in where the parents may not have citizenship, but the child being born here does, and have to kind of go to court and defend in these kind of hostile environments as well. So I think that's another kind of piece, in addition to kind of the monetary burden and the administrative burden of having to do it. There's also this kind of fear component that I'm sure is going to be part of a chilling effect for folks who are born here and would seek citizenship through birthright citizenship. So could you tell us, and I think this is going to be kind of our last question here in this fast take, what does this mean for the rule of law? For courts to not be able to enjoin beyond their courtroom, but to jurisdictions nationally, is that kind of a departure? Is that something that we're seeing here?
So it's an interesting question. The universal injunctions are actually not something that have been used that much historically. As a matter of fact, one reason the Supreme Court held that universal injunctions are not something that are authorized by the Judiciary Act of 1789, which is actually the basis for this decision, is because they were not something that were used historically, and that in fact were not used for a couple of centuries, and really are more of a modern type of injunction. The use of universal injunctions has always been a little bit uncertain as to whether or not they were going to be useful or not. The use has really accelerated dramatically, I think, under President Trump. Right now, there appear to be at least 25 universal injunctions that have been entered against President Trump. And so a big part of it, I think, has been that this administration has been a lot more enthusiastic about doing a lot of things that are affecting a lot of people and are of questionable legality. And so universal injunctions seemed to the lower courts to be appropriate. And so how is this going to affect the rule of law? Well, this is obviously going to give the executive branch the authority to move forward and do things that are going to have a negative effect. And the law, of course, moves very slowly in many cases. And so, in fact, there could be interim periods of months, if not years, where the executive branch will be moving forward with their interpretations that might ultimately lose. But in the meantime, there will be people affected, whether or not this is serves anybody's purpose, because a lot of times you're going to have to unwind the situations that are set up by this. If you start denying a lot of people benefits, if you start changing a lot of things based on law and then it gets overturned, it all has to be, fixed, then this is not clear it's really going to be helping anybody. In terms of the larger impact of this decision, it's actually really complicated. So I was kind of giving you the worst case scenario for universal injunctions in this particular case. I should say that there are a number of procedural tools that are available that can mimic universal injunctions. So, for instance, states actually sued and were some of the entities who were part of these court cases. And the states basically made their arguments that, well, we're affected by this too because we administer these benefits. And so in the 22 states who joined in these cases, the application of the injunction is actually going to stand. So you're going to get this strange situation where in these 22 states, birthright citizenship is going to be basically treated as it exists, and then all the rest of the states is not. So that's going to lead to some real confusion. Class action is available. People don't realize, class action's a little hard to get. You really have to establish a lot of facts first, such as that you've reached all the people in the class and they've all been notified, et cetera. It's a little hard to get class actions together, but you can get associations to sign up. There's a lot of different ways to get a lot of different people in front of courts. It's just much, much harder. And in particular cases such as the birthright citizenship, it's particularly hard. It's less hard in situations where you're dealing with things like universities or you're dealing with businesses or schools. So in some ways, the impact here on rule of law, I believe, it's really going to depend on the particular action by the executive branch and really the resources of the entities who are being affected here. And that's just one of these unfortunate practical effects. If you have the money and you have the resources and you have the political will, then you can probably get your day in court and get it resolved. But that means that there's just going to be a lot more essentially bullying that's going to be more effective in this context.
Thanks, Ken. All right, so thanks for jumping on and answering these questions on a short notice here. For folks listening, please like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you for sending your questions. That's what got us on the line today. And if you want to learn anything more about what we've talked about today, let us know. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Adna.